Something happened inside Royal Lodge on a quiet autumn night. Something so startling, so unexpected, that even the closest royal watchers still struggle to understand how it spiraled so fast. If you had been standing behind those heavy oak doors, if you had heard the crack in Andrew's voice or the stunned silence that fell over Sarah Ferguson's face, you would have realized one thing instantly. This wasn't just another royal argument. This was the moment everything changed. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. But before we even step into that moment, I need to ask you a question. What would make a man who once called Sarah Ferguson the one constant in his chaotic public life suddenly order her to leave the home they'd shared, even his exes, for decades? Think about that. What would push him to make a choice so drastic, so irreversible, that the shockwaves would travel all the way to Buckingham Palace and back? Because here's the truth. This wasn't about a single fight or a single phone call. This was about pressure that had been building for years, quietly, invisibly, until the night it finally exploded. And the strange part? Even those closest to the couple didn't see it coming. Royal Lodge had always been a symbol of stability in their unusual relationship. Not romance. Not anymore, but a strange sort of partnership. They lived together long after their marriage ended, raising their daughters, sharing holidays, laughing like old friends, arguing like old friends too. And after all the public storms, all the controversies, all the whispers and headlines, Sarah remained one of the only people Andrew trusted. So why would he suddenly want her gone? To answer that, we need to go back a few weeks earlier, to October 2025. The moment King Charles made a decision that would shake the royal family from the inside out. A decision that hit Andrew harder than anyone expected. It was the day Andrew lost everything that made him Prince Andrew. His titles were removed. His remaining patronages dissolved. His formal role, or whatever was left of it, erased. For years, there had been debate and speculation about whether the monarchy would take that final step. And in this fictional dramatization, the moment finally came not with fanfare, but with a simple announcement. The king had formally withdrawn Andrew's remaining royal titles. It was a symbolic severing, a final line drawn in the sand between the monarchy's future and Andrew's past. But what most people don't know is what happened inside Royal Lodge in the days that followed. According to fictional insiders in this story, the air in the house felt heavy. Not tense, heavy. The way a room feels before a storm breaks. Sarah tried to keep the mood light, to act as the calm in the chaos. She had done it many times before. She knew Andrew better than anyone, knew how he reacted when the walls closed in around him. Humor usually worked. Warmth usually worked. Familiarity usually worked. This time, nothing worked. Andrew shut down. He barely spoke. He barely slept. He paced, room to room, sometimes forgetting why he walked there in the first place. And the worst part? Nobody could reach him. Not his staff. Not his daughters. Not even Sarah. It wasn't anger that consumed him. Not at first. It was displacement. Confusion. A sense that he no longer had a place in the world. The royal family has always been built on identity. Titles, roles, positions, lineage. When those vanish, what's left? Who are you without a title? Who are you if your entire life was defined by something that no longer exists? Sarah tried to remind him of the things that still mattered. Family, love, history, memories. But Andrew didn't want reminders. Not then. He wanted answers. Answers nobody could give him. And that's when the tension began. If you've ever watched someone you care about unravel, you know the helpless feeling Sarah faced. You know the way every conversation becomes a tightrope walk. You know the way even silence becomes dangerous, because silence leaves room for thoughts that spiral. The fictional sources in this story say Sarah tried everything. Gentle conversations, practical solutions, even small household routines to restore normalcy. But the pressure kept building, and soon, the atmosphere inside Royal Lodge shifted again. It wasn't just heavy now, it was volatile. Andrew grew suspicious. Of what? That's the strange part. It wasn't entirely clear. Maybe the press leaks. Maybe the whispers. Maybe the shifting dynamics within the royal family. Maybe a combination of all three. But something changed in the way he looked at people. Including Sarah. He started asking her unusual questions. Who had she spoken to? What had she overheard? What messages had she received? Why had she stepped outside 10 minutes longer than usual? Why did she close the door while taking a call? Questions that, under normal circumstances, would have sounded harmless. But in the concentrated atmosphere of Royal Lodge, they carried weight. Sarah was stunned, hurt even. After everything she had stood by him through, after all the judgment she had absorbed simply by staying close to him, how could he start questioning her loyalty? But Andrew wasn't thinking clearly. The fictional portrayal here shows him as a man cracking under pressure, paranoid, overwhelmed, and desperately trying to maintain control over the one thing he had left, his home. Royal Lodge wasn't just a house. It was his last anchor, the final piece of his identity that hadn't been stripped away. But there was a problem, and Sarah knew it before he did. If Andrew lost control of himself, the palace would intervene. And if the palace intervened, Royal Lodge wouldn't be his for much longer. And here's where things get complicated. Sarah had been keeping a secret of her own in this fictional narrative. Not a scandalous one, not something explosive, but something emotional, something personal. Something Andrew wasn't ready to hear in the fragile state he was in. For weeks, she had been considering stepping back from Royal Lodge herself. Not permanently, but temporarily. To give him space. To give herself clarity. To assess the situation without being swallowed by the emotional storm. But she hadn't told him yet. She didn't know how. She didn't want to hurt him. And she feared he would misinterpret her decision as abandonment. So she stayed. Even when the atmosphere grew colder, even when Andrew began pulling away, even when the conversations became tense and unpredictable, she stayed because she still believed he needed her. But then came the night everything snapped. The fictional scene goes like this. A late-night call arrived at Royal Lodge. No one knows exactly what was said, or who was on the other end, or what triggered the reaction. But Andrew's demeanor shifted instantly. He walked down the hall with heavy footsteps. He called Sarah's name. His voice sounded strained, almost like he was forcing each word through clenched teeth. Sarah appeared at the doorway, confused, concerned. And that's when he said it. You need to leave. The silence afterward was thick and suffocating. She blinked, wondering if she had misheard him. You need to leave. Tonight. The words hung in the air like smoke. Sarah's heart dropped. Not because she feared losing the house. Not because she feared what the press would say. But because she had never heard Andrew speak like that. Distant, cold, resolute. She asked why. He didn't answer. He simply looked past her, as if he was staring at something only he could see. Something had shifted inside him. Something irreversible. But here's the thing, and this is where curiosity spikes. The call didn't just concern Andrew. It concerned Sarah too. Because whatever he heard, whatever information landed in his ear, convinced him that Sarah's presence in Royal Lodge was suddenly dangerous. But dangerous how? Dangerous to him? To the monarchy? To the media narrative? Or dangerous to the secret Andrew believed someone had uncovered? Even now, it's unclear. And that's where this fictional story truly begins. With a single decision, made in the middle of the night, under pressures no outsider could fully understand. But Sarah wasn't going to walk out quietly. In fact, what she said next, in a shaking voice, but with unmistakable conviction, caught Andrew completely off guard. And her words would soon travel beyond those walls, reaching ears she never expected. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't stay buried forever. It slips out in moments of fear, heartbreak, or desperation. The night Sarah Ferguson stepped out of Royal Lodge wasn't the end of the story. It was the spark. And what came after would shake the monarchy even further. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. You can tell when a house is holding a secret. Even before anyone speaks, before any door slams, or any light flickers in a hallway, you can feel it. The air shifts. The rhythm of the place breaks. A room that once felt warm suddenly feels watchful. And Royal Lodge, with its sprawling corridors, its old oak beams, its heavy velvet curtains, had been holding a secret for days. But tonight was different. Tonight, Royal Lodge felt like it was holding its breath. The shocking part is this. If you had walked past its grand windows that evening, you wouldn't have seen anything unusual. Lamps glowed softly inside. A fire crackled faintly in the sitting room. A house that had survived decades of royal life appeared perfectly still, as if time had pressed pause. But inside those walls, something was unraveling. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever known something was about to explode before it actually did? That eerie sense that a conversation, or an entire life, is about to shift into a direction no one can pull back from. That was the atmosphere inside Royal Lodge the night everything changed. Andrew hadn't spoken much for hours, but that wasn't unusual, not lately. Ever since the fictional October 2025 announcement that stripped him of every remaining title, he had moved through the house like a shadow of himself. He paced. He muttered. He stood at windows for long stretches, staring out at the dark lawns as if expecting someone to walk up the drive. And Sarah, she was trying her best not to show how worried she was. Maybe she was afraid that any display of emotion, concern, frustration, sympathy, would push him even further into the corner he had retreated to. She kept her tone light, her footsteps soft, her presence steady. If she needed to sigh, she did it in another room. If she felt sad, she saved it for nighttime, when he couldn't see the expression on her face. But tonight, Andrew felt different. More agitated, more tightly wound, like someone had turned a dial inside him a notch too far. It began with small things. He walked faster than usual. His hands trembled slightly when he picked up a glass. He checked his phone repeatedly, though no new messages appeared. And then he stopped answering her entirely. Sarah had asked him a simple question. Something harmless about dinner plans or whether he wanted tea, and he didn't respond. He just stared at the mantelpiece as if it were whispering something only he could hear. She watched him for a long moment, trying to understand what was happening behind those distant eyes. Was he thinking? Remembering? Panicking? She couldn't tell. And that was the most unnerving part, because Andrew had always been expressive, even in difficult moments. You always knew if he was upset or stressed or frustrated. He carried his emotions on the surface. But now he seemed sealed off from the world. Sarah stood in the doorway and quietly studied him. His posture was stiff, his breathing uneven. He looked like someone waiting for a verdict and not expecting a good one. Finally, she stepped into the room. Andrew? She said softly. He didn't turn. He didn't even blink. But something in the air changed when she spoke. A flicker, a spark, a tightening. She walked closer, placing one careful step in front of the other. Are you all right? She asked. Still nothing. She could feel the house listening. For a moment, she imagined the walls leaning in, the old beams holding their breath, the carpets muffling their own silence. Then, suddenly, his phone buzzed. The sound cut through the room sharply, too sharply. Andrew snapped out of his trance. He lunged for the phone, almost knocking over a coaster in the process. His hands shook as he grabbed it. And when he saw the name on the screen, whoever it belonged to, something dark and heavy passed over his face. Sarah froze. She had seen that expression before. Once. Years ago. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was the expression of a man who knew something he didn't want to know. He stepped away from her, toward the far side of the room, lowering his voice as he answered the call. She couldn't hear the words, only fragments. Sharp whispers, clipped sentences, half-swallowed replies. Then silence. Then a single phrase, spoken quietly but with unmistakable weight. I understand. Not, all right. Or, okay. Or, fine. I understand. If you've ever heard someone say that after devastating news, you know the tone. He ended the call slowly. Slowly enough that it made the moment feel even heavier. Sarah stepped forward. Andrew? He didn't turn around. A long silence hung between them. Long enough for Sarah to notice the wind pressing against the windows. Long enough for her to hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Then Andrew spoke. His voice was hoarse, strained, unfamiliar. You shouldn't be here. Sarah blinked. What do you mean? He turned around, finally, and for a split second, she thought she saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of her. Fear of something else. Something outside their control. Something closing in. He stepped closer, but his expression stayed distant. You shouldn't be here tonight, he repeated. Sarah felt her chest tighten. Why? What happened? What did they say? But Andrew wasn't answering questions. He wasn't even responding to her tone. He just stared, as if trying to memorize her face. And then he said the words that marked the beginning of the spiral. You need to leave the house. Sarah laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Leave? What are you talking about? His jaw tightened. Tonight. Her smile faded. Andrew. Stop. Just tell me what's going on. He shook his head. You need to trust me on this. Trust him? She always had. through storms, scandals, and years of public scrutiny. If loyalty had a face, it would look like Sarah Ferguson's record with him. But tonight, Andrew wasn't speaking like someone protecting her. He was speaking like someone under instructions. Her voice softened. "Is this about that call?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was loud enough. Sarah looked around the room she had walked through 1,000 times, the room filled with memories of birthdays, holidays, family dinners. She realized, suddenly, painfully, that Andrew wasn't just asking her to leave the house. He was asking her to step out of the one place where their strange but steadfast bond had lived for decades. She stepped closer. "Andrew, you're scaring me." He blinked, and for a flicker of a moment, his mask slipped. She saw the turmoil underneath. Confusion, guilt, fear, maybe even regret. But then it was gone. "I'm serious," he said. "You need to go." She shook her head. "I'm not leaving without knowing why." He exhaled, long and heavy, looking down at the floor. "Sarah, don't make this harder." Harder? What could possibly be harder than being asked to pack her things and step out of the only home where she had ever felt both welcome and unwelcome at the same time? Her hands trembled slightly, though she hid it well. "Andrew, please." But he didn't soften. His shoulders sagged. His face paled. His voice cracked in a way she had never heard before, low, rough, almost defeated. "They know." Her heart froze. "Who?" She whispered. He swallowed. "It doesn't matter. They know, and you can't be here when they act on it." "Act on what?" Silence. Andrew opened his mouth, closed it, then looked away, as if the truth was too dangerous to say out loud. Sarah felt her throat tighten. "Whatever this is, we face it together." He flinched at the word together. "No, we don't," he said. "Not this time." Sarah tried again. "Andrew." "No, Sarah. You need to leave." His tone wasn't cruel. It wasn't angry. It was something far worse. Final. As if a decision had been made by someone unseen. As if he were merely delivering it. She stepped back slowly, as if testing whether distance would make the truth feel less sharp. It didn't. She looked at him carefully, trying to understand the deeper meaning behind the words he wasn't saying. Was he trying to protect her? Was he afraid of something? Was he being pressured? Or was this the breaking point she had feared? The moment the stress finally pushed him to a place neither of them could pull him back from? Andrew turned away again, running a hand over his face. "This isn't about you," he said. "It's about what happens next." His voice wavered at the end. Sarah's breath caught. "What happens next?" Andrew hesitated, the kind of hesitation that tells you the truth is worse than the silence. And when he finally spoke, the room felt colder than it had all night. "Something is coming to Royal Lodge," he said quietly, "and you can't be here when it arrives." Sarah's skin prickled with dread. What could possibly be coming? And who had told Andrew? She opened her mouth to demand answers, but the look on his face made her stop. He wasn't hiding the truth because he wanted to. He was hiding it because he believed he had no choice. She grabbed her coat from the chair. "Fine," she said. "I'll go." But she didn't leave without one final sentence. Firm, steady, and more prophetic than she realized in that moment. "This won't end here, Andrew." He closed his eyes. "I know." And he was right. Because what happened after she stepped out of Royal Lodge would ignite a chain reaction neither of them could control. And no one, not Andrew, not Sarah, not even the king, saw the next twist coming. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. There's a moment after you walk out of a house, especially a house like Royal Lodge, when the night air hits you harder than you expect. It's like the world outside has been waiting for you to step into it. And suddenly everything feels too loud, too sharp, too real. That's what Sarah felt as she walked down the stone steps, her coat wrapped tightly around her, her breath fogging in the cool night air. She didn't cry, not then, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She looked back at the house, that grand, old, complicated house, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like home. It felt like a stranger, a quiet one, a watchful one. Maybe you've felt that before. When a place that once gave you comfort suddenly feels unfamiliar, even threatening. When the walls don't echo your memories anymore. When the air inside no longer carries your laughter. That's what Sarah was walking away from. But here's the thing about Sarah Ferguson in this fictional story. She wasn't someone who ran from problems. And she wasn't someone who broke easily. She had lived through decades of public judgment, endless scrutiny, and moments that would have shattered most people. Yet she kept going. Still, this was different. She reached her car, sat behind the wheel, and just stared at the dashboard, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But no matter how she replayed Andrew's words, the tone, the urgency, the strange warning, nothing added up. Who were they? What did they know? And what was supposed to be coming to Royal Lodge? The more she tried to answer those questions, the more distant the answers felt. Finally, she reached for her phone. Not to call Andrew, not to call the palace, but to call someone who understood her not as a duchess, not as a public figure, but as a person, a friend. Because sometimes, when your world tilts sideways, you need someone who knew you before the chaos. She scrolled through her contacts and hesitated before pressing the button. It wasn't her closest friend, not the one everyone expected her to confide in. No, she chose someone who wouldn't judge, someone who wouldn't interrupt with advice or gossip, someone who simply listened. The call connected. A warm, steady voice answered. Sarah? Everything all right? Sarah's breath caught. Sometimes a simple question, everything all right, is all it takes for the truth to rise dangerously close to the surface. No, she said quietly. I don't think it is. There was a pause on the other end. The kind of pause that means, tell me everything. And she did. Not at first. She started slowly, cautiously, almost as if saying the words too quickly would make them real. She explained the strange behavior, the tension, the distance. She described the phone call, not the details, because she didn't know them, but the effect it had on Andrew. And then she repeated the words he had said. You need to leave. Tonight. Something is coming. Her friend exhaled sharply. Sarah, that's not normal. I know. What do you think he meant? I don't know. And that's what scares me. It was the first time she allowed the fear into her voice. The first time she admitted, even to herself, that something about Andrew's behavior wasn't just emotional turmoil or stress or confusion. Something else was happening. Something outside of him. Her friend asked gently, do you think he was trying to protect you? The question hung in the air. Sarah thought about it. The look in his eyes. The urgency in his voice. The way he wouldn't explain, but insisted she leave anyway. The guilt she thought she saw, but couldn't confirm. Maybe, she whispered. But if he was, then from what? Her friend didn't answer. Because what answer could they possibly give? Instead, they said, where are you now? In the car. Still outside the house. Do you want to come over? She nodded instinctively, forgetting they couldn't see her. Yes, please. The drive wasn't long, but it felt endless. Every turn seemed heavier than the last. Every streetlight flickered in a way that made her more aware of her own heartbeat. And with every passing minute, the weight of the night grew. And that's when it happened. Halfway through the drive, Sarah suddenly felt a wave of emotion rising. Not panic, not anger, but something deeper. Something she'd been holding back for weeks. Something she had never said out loud, not even to Andrew. It wasn't about the house. It wasn't about the royal titles. It wasn't even about the strange warning. It was something she had been carrying quietly, privately, waiting for the right moment to share. But tonight wasn't the right moment. Tonight, it simply broke through. She pulled into her friend's driveway, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a moment, breathing slowly, trying to steady herself. But it didn't work. Her friend came outside, opened the car door, and saw the look on her face. That mixture of pain, confusion, and something else. Something heavier. Sarah, what is it? I need to tell you something, she said. But you have to promise not to interrupt. Her friend nodded and led her inside. They sat at the kitchen table, not in a living room, not in a formal space, but at the table where real conversations happen, where truth doesn't hide behind polite smiles. Sarah took a breath, and then she revealed the thing she hadn't told anyone. Not Andrew, not her daughters, not the palace, not the public. She had been planning to leave Royal Lodge. Not permanently. Not dramatically. Not out of anger. But because she felt something shifting long before Andrew noticed it himself. She felt the imbalance. The tension. The strain. She saw the signs. The sleepless nights. The pacing. The mistrust. The desperation to hold on to something he felt slipping away. And she knew. She absolutely knew. That if she didn't create space, if she didn't step back, things would eventually reach a breaking point. She had been waiting for the right time to tell him. A calm moment. A quiet conversation. Not an argument. Not a night like this. But that moment never came. And now? Now Andrew had told her to leave first. Her friend stared at her, processing every word. Why didn't you tell him? Because he would have taken it the wrong way, Sarah said. He would have thought I was abandoning him. And that wasn't true. No. She stayed because she cared. She stayed because she believed he needed at least one stable presence. She stayed because she thought her leaving would be the thing that finally broke him. But now? Now she wasn't sure who was breaking. Her friend reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You did what you thought was right. Sarah looked down. Did I? There was a long silence. The kind of silence that fills a room with more meaning than words ever could. Then her friend asked the question Sarah had been avoiding. Do you think Andrew is in danger? Sarah's eyes lifted. I think. She said slowly. I think he believes he is. And what about you? Sarah hesitated. I think he believes I'm in danger too. The room felt colder suddenly, as if the walls were absorbing the weight of that sentence. Danger from whom? I don't know, Sarah whispered. But whatever that call was, it changed him. Her friend leaned back, thinking. Do you want my honest opinion? Sarah nodded. I think you need to tell someone. Tell who? The palace? There was no easy answer. The palace had its own agenda, its own politics, its own priorities. And Sarah had learned long ago that the palace didn't always protect the people inside it. Not the way the public assumed. Tell your daughters, her friend said. They should know what's going on. Sarah shook her head immediately. No, I'm not dragging them into this. Not yet. Then, her friend paused. Then tell me everything, start to finish. Don't leave anything out. And so she did. She talked for nearly an hour, tracing the buildup of tension, the odd conversations, the distant look in Andrew's eyes, the feeling that something invisible was moving toward Royal Lodge. And when she finished, her friend said something she did not expect. Sarah, I don't think Andrew told you the whole truth tonight. Her heart jumped. What do you mean? I think he knows more than he let on. And I think he didn't tell you because he was afraid you'd be caught in the middle of it. Sarah looked away. Maybe. No, her friend insisted gently. Not maybe. He was trying to protect you. It was a comforting thought, but it was also a terrifying one. Because if Andrew was trying to protect her, then something, or someone, was coming. But that wasn't the only revelation of the night. Near the end of their conversation, when Sarah finally stopped speaking, when the tension eased just enough for her shoulders to drop, her friend asked one final question. Sarah, is there something else you're not telling me? Sarah froze. Because there was. Something she hadn't admitted to anyone, including herself. The reason she was planning to step back from Royal Lodge wasn't just because Andrew was unraveling. It was because she had found something. Something in the house. Something Andrew never knew she saw. Something she had promised herself she would confront him about when the moment was right. But that moment never came. Her friend saw the hesitation in her face. What is it? Sarah looked toward the window, as if the night held the answer. I found something in the house, she whispered. Something Andrew didn't want anyone to see. Her friend's breath caught. Sarah, what did you find? Sarah shook her head slowly. I can't explain it yet. Not until I understand it myself. Her friend leaned forward. Does it have something to do with why he told you to leave? Sarah didn't answer. Because deep down, she feared the answer was yes. And that fear would soon become reality. Because the thing Sarah found in Royal Lodge, the thing she didn't tell Andrew she knew about, wasn't just a clue. It was the fuse. And it wouldn't stay hidden for long. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. People always imagine that a royal life means endless money, endless privilege, endless cushioning against the real world. But that's the biggest misunderstanding of all. Because in reality, and especially in this fictional version of events, the walls around Andrew weren't made of gold. They were made of bills. Bills that grew. Bills that multiplied. Bills that waited quietly in the background until finally they swallowed the room. But let's start with the moment everything cracked. The moment the financial storm stopped being a quiet threat and became a roaring, unstoppable force. It happened 5 days before the night Sarah left Royal Lodge. 5 days when Andrew received a document he had been avoiding for months. A financial assessment. If you've ever put off opening an envelope because you know what's inside will change your mood for the entire week, you understand the feeling. Except this wasn't a regular envelope. This was a thick file delivered by 2 senior estate managers, people who didn't waste time on pleasantries when the situation was serious. And this situation was serious. More serious than even Sarah realized at the time. The fictional report was blunt. It explained that Royal Lodge, a grand, historic, sprawling property, required enormous upkeep. The roof alone needed significant repair. The grounds demanded year-round maintenance. Security was expensive. Insurance was expensive. Utilities were expensive. In other words, everything was expensive. For years, these costs were manageable. Covered, absorbed, compensated through arrangements that existed quietly behind palace doors. But after the October 2025 decision, the removal of Andrew's remaining titles, those arrangements shifted. Technically, his living situation hadn't been revoked. Practically, everything had changed, because the palace wasn't going to fund the lifestyle of someone no longer carrying any official role. And Andrew didn't have the private income to sustain the estate the way it needed to be sustained. That's when the fictional overflow sheet came out. It was a simple page. Just numbers. But sometimes numbers speak louder than words. Projected annual cost of repairs, too high. Projected maintenance, higher. Security expenses, extremely high. And then the number that shook him most. Projected sustainability, nearly impossible. Andrew had always believed Royal Lodge was unshakable. His safe place. His permanent address. His final anchor. But suddenly, that anchor looked like a sinking weight pulling him under. He stared at the sheet for a long time, gripping the edges so tightly his knuckles went pale. For the first time, he realized something he had never dared to consider. He might lose Royal Lodge. The estate managers left him with folders, recommendations, and carefully worded notes about downsizing options, alternative arrangements, transitional housing, and long-term sustainability planning. That was polite palace language. What it really meant was, start preparing to leave. But Andrew wasn't someone who handled transition well. He wasn't someone who embraced change. And he wasn't someone who liked to admit vulnerability. So instead of discussing the report with Sarah, instead of opening the door to a calm, rational conversation, he buried it. He hid the documents in his private office drawer, as though physical distance could erase the truth. But the truth didn't stay quiet. It grew louder, because bills don't disappear when ignored. They multiply. Sarah noticed the shift immediately. This fictional Sarah had always been perceptive, one of her greatest strengths. She didn't need to see the report to recognize something had unsettled Andrew. She saw it in the way he walked, the way he pressed the bridge of his nose when he thought she wasn't looking, the way he paced during the night, opening and closing doors as though searching for something he couldn't name. She asked him several times, "Is something wrong?" And each time he said, "No, it's nothing. Don't worry." The more he insisted nothing was wrong, the more she worried. And she was right too, because that report wasn't just a financial document. It was a countdown. A silent timer ticking away behind the walls of Royal Lodge. Tick, tick, tick. And Andrew felt every second of it. The pressure did something strange to him. It made him desperate to cling to control, even when control was slipping through his fingers. It made him suspicious, restless, and erratic. Not because of the money itself, but because of what the money represented. Losing Royal Lodge meant losing the last thing that made him feel grounded. After everything else that had been taken, roles, duties, public identity, Royal Lodge was the final symbol of stability. And now that symbol was cracking. He couldn't accept it. He wouldn't accept it. So he did what people often do when confronted with overwhelming truth. He broke it into pieces and tried to ignore the biggest one. He focused on small things instead: a loose window latch, an outdated security camera, a flickering light in the east hallway. He demanded repairs on minor issues, as if fixing tiny things could keep the bigger things from falling apart. But Sarah saw the pattern. She saw the frantic attempts to control the uncontrollable. She tried to talk to him. "Andrew, something is going on. You're not yourself." He snapped back. "I'm fine." But he wasn't. He was terrified. And when fear grows invisible, it becomes dangerous. There was something else too, something the palace didn't know. Andrew had been quietly funneling money into holding the estate together. Not huge sums. He didn't have huge sums, but enough that his own accounts were beginning to shrink in concerning ways. Sarah found out by accident. Not because she was snooping, not because she was watching him, but because she received a bank notification for a small shared expense they had connected years earlier, an old account tied to a charity project she and Andrew once collaborated on. It said, Incomplete transfer due to insufficient balance. Sarah frowned. That account never dipped below a certain threshold. Never. So she checked it. The numbers shocked her. Not because the account was empty, but because she recognized the pattern. Small withdrawals. Frequent withdrawals. Not random. Not accidental. These were payments he was making to maintain Royal Lodge. Payments he never told her about. Payments he couldn't afford. That's when she realized the truth. Andrew wasn't clinging to Royal Lodge because it was comfortable. He was clinging to it because it was the last piece of his identity. And identity is the hardest thing to let go of. She confronted him gently. Andrew, we need to talk about the finances. He turned sharp. No. Andrew, you're paying for things alone. You can't. I said no, Sarah. She paused. Why won't you let me help? Because I don't need help. But he did. More than he could admit. Over the next week, the financial pressure grew so heavy it began affecting everything else. Conversations, moods, even the energy of the house. His footsteps became louder. His voice became shorter. His patience evaporated. Sarah felt like she was living in a house that was shrinking around her. But she still stayed. Because she believed, truly believed, that she could help him through it. Until the night she discovered the second document. It was hidden behind an old painting in Andrew's study. Not intentionally hidden, not locked away, but placed in a spot that indicated Andrew didn't want it in plain sight. Curiosity got the best of her. She pulled it out. It was a notice. A fictional notice from estate auditors stating that Andrew had 3 months to demonstrate financial viability of Royal Lodge, or the palace would intervene with a reassignment recommendation. Reassignment. That was palace language for, you will be moved. Somewhere smaller. Somewhere less symbolic. Somewhere less costly. Somewhere that wasn't Royal Lodge. Sarah stared at the notice for a long time, her heart pounding. This wasn't just a financial problem. This was a crisis. One Andrew had been hiding not because he wanted to deceive her, but because he didn't want her to see how scared he was. She folded the notice, placed it back exactly as she found it, and walked out of the study quietly. In that moment, she knew 2 things. 1. Andrew was in deeper trouble than she realized. And 2. She couldn't stay in Royal Lodge forever. Because the house wasn't stable anymore. The finances weren't stable. Andrew wasn't stable. She needed to step back for her own well-being. Not to abandon him, but to preserve herself before the spiral dragged her down too. But she never got the chance to tell him. The situation escalated faster than she predicted. Andrew became consumed by private meetings. Fictional estate managers arriving and leaving at odd hours. He began making urgent calls from behind locked doors. He reacted defensively to harmless questions. He snapped at shadows. And then came the final blow. He received another document. Another envelope. Another late-night delivery. Whatever he read inside that envelope didn't just worry him. It shattered him. Sarah didn't see the letter, but she saw the effect. The storm in his eyes, the trembling hands, the look of someone who had just lost the final thread holding their world together. That letter was the thing that broke him. The thing that pushed him from fear into panic. The thing that made him see danger everywhere, even in the people who cared about him. And it was the final step toward the night he told Sarah to leave. But here's the important part. That letter wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what he believed the letter meant. Because in Andrew's mind, in his fragile, collapsing emotional state, the financial crisis wasn't just about money. It was about betrayal. He believed someone was behind it. Someone close. Someone who knew his weaknesses and used them. And that belief grew until it swallowed everything, including the one person who had stood beside him longer than anyone else. The financial collapse didn't just break his bank accounts. It broke his trust. And that fractured trust would be the domino that tipped the entire night into disaster. Because the next question wasn't about money at all. It was about loyalty. And Andrew suddenly wasn't sure who he could trust. But the real shock? He wasn't entirely wrong. Something, or someone, really was moving against him. And Sarah's discovery was only the beginning. Because what she found next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. People talk about Royal Lodge as if it's just a house, an old, sprawling, ivy-lined estate tucked behind winding drives and protected by towering trees. But Royal Lodge isn't a house. Not in this fictional story. Not in the way Andrew felt it. Not in the way Sarah lived it. And definitely not in the way the palace viewed it. Royal Lodge was territory. And territory, when threatened, becomes a battlefield. Even before Sarah discovered the hidden financial notice, there had already been whispers. Quiet ones. Hushed ones. Whispers about restructuring. Whispers about allocation. Whispers about transitioning royal properties to better reflect the modern monarchy. If you think that sounds harmless, think again. Because behind each gentle word was a much harsher truth. They wanted Royal Lodge back. Not because they needed it. There were more than enough royal residences. Not because it was empty. Andrew had lived there for years. Not because it was falling apart, though, admittedly, it needed work. They wanted it back because of symbolism. Symbolism is powerful. Symbolism is political. Symbolism is public. And Royal Lodge, with all its history, grandeur, and weight, symbolized something the king could not afford to be associated with anymore. A past the monarchy wanted to move on from. In this fictional world, Royal Lodge had become a ghost of the old era, and the palace was determined to reclaim it. But Andrew wasn't going to let go easily. The turf war began quietly, as most wars do. It started with gentle inquiries, a few politely worded emails, requests for updated reports on the estate's maintenance. Then came the visits. Estate managers, financial officers, security coordinators, all arriving under the guise of routine evaluation. But Sarah saw the pattern instantly. These weren't evaluations. These were inspections. And inspections meant pressure. Pressure meant deadlines. And deadlines meant one thing: takeover. But Andrew refused to see it. Or maybe he did see it. And that's what terrified him most. He reacted to every palace communication with increasing defensiveness. Every visit put him on edge. Every conversation left him agitated. When one estate manager suggested structural changes to future-proof the property, Andrew snapped. There won't be any future-proofing. I'm not leaving. The manager had only meant roof work. But Andrew heard relocation. And maybe he wasn't wrong to hear it. Because behind the scenes, palace discussions had shifted tone entirely. What began as concern for sustainability turned into urging him to consider alternative residences, then strongly recommending relocation. And by the time the financial notice arrived, the one Sarah found hidden behind the painting, the palace tone had changed again. It wasn't a recommendation anymore. It was a warning. Sarah, meanwhile, found herself trapped in the middle, an invisible middle, one nobody acknowledged, but one she felt in every conversation, every step through the house. Andrew wanted to fight. The palace wanted him gone. And Sarah wanted peace, but peace was no longer an option. One afternoon, a fictional palace advisor came to Royal Lodge for what was described as a routine check-in. It wasn't routine. He arrived with 2 folders, a neutral expression, and a kind of rehearsed calm that always means something unpleasant is about to happen. He sat across from Andrew in the sitting room, hands clasped, expression politely blank. Andrew, he began, I know this is a difficult time. Whenever someone starts with that line, you know the next sentence will make things worse. The king, the advisor continued carefully, has been discussing the future of several royal properties. Andrew's jaw tightened. And Royal Lodge, the advisor added, is part of that discussion. Part of that discussion. A phrase that sounded courteous on the surface but carried the weight of an eviction notice underneath. Sarah sat quietly beside Andrew, her heart tightening with every word. The advisor continued. This house has historical significance, national significance, and considerable ongoing costs. Given the circumstances, it would be beneficial for all parties to consider. Andrew cut him off. No. The advisor blinked, startled. No, Andrew repeated. I'm not considering anything. I've lived here for decades. This is my home. Sarah watched the advisor's expression closely. He hadn't come to negotiate. He had come to deliver a message. And messages like that aren't softened by protests. I understand your feelings, he said gently, but the decision may ultimately be out of your hands. Andrew stood abruptly, nearly knocking over the table. Out of my hands. Is that what you people think of me now? Sarah reached for his arm. Andrew. He pulled back, pacing. I'm not a tenant. I'm not some visitor you can shuffle around. This is Royal Lodge. And then, as if the weight of the situation suddenly crashed down on him, he slammed his hand against the mantelpiece. I will not be moved. The advisor didn't flinch. He simply placed one of the folders on the table. That's when Sarah saw it. A large red stamp across the front. Priority review. She felt her stomach drop. The advisor stood. I'll leave this with you. We can revisit the conversation next week. Next week. As if everything inside Royal Lodge wasn't already unraveling. When the advisor left, Andrew paced the room like a trapped animal. Not angry, desperate. That kind of desperation that comes when something important is slipping from your grip and you don't know how to stop it. Sarah picked up the folder he left behind. Inside were projections, budget comparisons, recommendations, and one section that made her breath catch. Potential reassignment plan, phase outline. It was a relocation proposal. She closed the folder quickly, not wanting Andrew to see what she had seen. Not right now. Not when he was already fraying. But she realized something crucial in that moment. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a countdown. A countdown to displacement. A countdown to the night everything exploded. And the countdown accelerated fast. The more the palace pressed, the more Andrew resisted. The more Andrew resisted, the more the palace tightened its grip. The more the palace tightened its grip, the more unstable Andrew became. Tension filled Royal Lodge like smoke. Moments that should have been calm turned sharp. Small misunderstandings flared. Every sound, every knock, every phone ring, every footstep felt like a threat. Sarah tried to intervene. She tried to calm him. Tried to reason with him. Tried to show him the reality without shattering him. But he wouldn't listen. He couldn't listen. Because underneath all the tension, there was something deeper, a hidden fear he never voiced. He wasn't afraid of losing the house. He was afraid of losing himself. Sarah saw it. She saw it in the way he traced old photos with trembling fingers. In the way he lingered in the hallways at night. In the way he clung to routine as if routine would save him. And that's when Sarah realized the darkest truth. The palace didn't need to push him out. His own unraveling would do it for them. After one particularly tense day, a day filled with calls, letters, and back-to-back visits, Sarah found Andrew in the East Corridor, staring at an old portrait. He looked exhausted. Smaller, somehow. Like a man standing in the ruins of something he didn't know how to rebuild. Andrew? She said gently. He didn't turn. They want me gone, he whispered. Sarah stepped closer. We can figure this out. He shook his head. No, they've already decided. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Then we face it together. He finally turned to look at her. That's when she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Not fear, not anger, but something else entirely. Defeat. And that scared her more than anything. Because a defeated person can break in dangerous ways. The turf war wasn't just between Andrew and the palace anymore. It was inside him. And Sarah was caught right in the middle. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that the turf war was about to escalate again. And this time it wouldn't just be financial, emotional, or symbolic. The next phase would be personal. And the palace wasn't the only force closing in. Because behind the scenes, quietly, slowly, ominously, another player had entered the game. Someone neither Sarah nor Andrew expected. Someone with influence. Someone with information. Someone who had no intention of letting Royal Lodge remain untouched. And the first sign of their involvement was about to appear. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. There are moments in royal life when conversations happen in brightly lit rooms, in front of advisors, cameras, and the ever-watchful press. And then there are the other moments. The ones that don't appear in diaries, aren't recorded in briefings, and never reach the polished halls of public knowledge. This was one of the latter. Because on the morning after the fictional priority review folder landed on Andrew's table, the folder that all but confirmed the palace's intent to reclaim Royal Lodge, King Charles held a private, unannounced meeting. Private meetings in the royal family are rarely truly private. There are always staff nearby, always someone listening through a door, always someone reading between the lines. But this meeting? This one was different. It was called at dawn. It was held in a quiet secondary conference room, away from the usual bustle. And only 3 people were invited. King Charles, a senior advisor, and Princess Anne, If there was ever a sign that the situation had reached a critical turning point, this was it. Let's set the scene. The room was small, compared to the palace's grand chambers. Just a long wooden table, tall windows, and a faint echo that came from decades of whispered decisions. Charles paced the room slowly, hands behind his back, his expression focused but weary. He had aged quickly in this fictional story, not because of years, but because of responsibility. Responsibility is heavy, and the crown, even when worn lightly, presses down on a person's shoulders in ways most people never see. The advisor sat with a folder open in front of him, the same folder Andrew had refused to look at properly. Inside were numbers, estimates, timelines, black and white proof of a situation spiraling out of control. Princess and stood near the window, her posture straight, her face unreadable, and was many things, practical, direct, unwavering. But in situations like this, she became something else too, the royal family's backbone. And was the one who said the things others didn't want to say, and was the one who forced decisions that were too uncomfortable for anyone else to confront, and was the one who refused to let emotion cloud the big picture. And today, the big picture was unavoidable. Charles finally stopped pacing. "Let's begin," he said. The advisor cleared his throat, flipping to the relevant page. "We've completed the latest sustainability assessment for Royal Lodge." As expected, the financial demands have increased significantly. With the recent changes in Andrew's status, the burden has shifted entirely onto internal funds which, frankly, are insufficient. Charles exhaled, his eyes closing briefly. Is there a scenario in which the estate is maintained without intervention? The advisor hesitated, and that alone answered the question, and spoke before he could. "No, there isn't." Her voice was steady, decisive. Charles looked at her, searching her expression for any hint of softness. There must be some way. "No." The interruption hit like a crack in the air, and stepped away from the window and approached the table. "Look at the numbers. Look at the pattern. Look at the pressure this is putting on both the staff and the institution. We can't keep pretending this isn't happening just because the truth is uncomfortable." Charles's jaw tightened. He knew she was right. He always knew she was right when she spoke like this. But Andrew is. Charles trailed off, because finishing the sentence meant admitting something he didn't want to say. But Andrew is family. Anne's expression softened for just a moment, a brief flash of sympathy that disappeared as quickly as it came. He is. But he's also making decisions from a place of fear, not stability. Charles sat down, folding his hands in front of him. "Fear," he murmured. "Fear that I created?" And didn't answer. She didn't need to. Charles rubbed his forehead. The decision in October, taking the titles. "I thought it was the right thing." It was, and said. It had to be done. But he's spiraling. He has been spiraling for months, and said bluntly, long before the titles were removed. The advisor cleared his throat gently, trying to recenter the discussion. "If I may. We are concerned that Andrew's current state is affecting the house staff, the upkeep of the estate, and the overall stability of Royal Lodge. The atmosphere is becoming increasingly unpredictable." Unpredictable, a word that in royal circles might as well be bolded, underlined, and circled in red. Charles leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a long moment. "What are you suggesting?" The advisor opened another envelope, one sealed not with wax, but with simple tape. Inside was a document containing a phrase that sent a chill through the room. Relocation Activation Protocol. Sarah had seen a softer version of this language. This was the real thing, and stepped closer. "We need to consider reassigning Royal Lodge." Charles closed his eyes. "Not yet," he said quietly, and crossed her arms. "Charles, not yet." His tone was sharp, final, but not confident. Andon saw the hesitation instantly. She took a breath. "Fine, but then you need to speak with him." The room fell silent. Speak with him. The phrase sounded simple, but every person in the room knew what it meant. Confront him. Warn him. Prepare him. Tell him that the ground beneath Royal Lodge was no longer stable. Tell him the monarchy was moving forward, whether he liked it or not. The advisor added quietly, "If you don't speak with him soon, the process will begin without his involvement." Charles looked up sharply. "You're saying the palace will act with or without him?" "I'm saying the situation is becoming untenable, sir." Charles looked at Anne. "Do you agree?" And didn't blink. "Yes." Charles's breath caught. His voice dropped to a whisper. "He's not ready." and softened again. Charles, none of us are. But this isn't about comfort. It's about stability. And right now, Royal Lodge is anything but stable. For a long moment, Charles didn't speak. He just stared at the table, the lines on the folder, the numbers that represented the slow unraveling of his brother's world. After nearly a minute, he finally said, "Fine, I'll speak to him." The advisor gathered his papers. "There is one more thing," and raised an eyebrow. "What now?" The advisor slid a second folder across the table. This one was thinner, more ominous. It contained a security assessment, an assessment about the increasing amount of foot traffic into Royal Lodge. Not just from advisors, auditors, and managers, but from people who weren't officially logged. People visiting Andrew. People who shouldn't have been there. People he refused to explain. Charles's eyes widened as he skimmed the report. Where did this come from? Security, the advisor said quietly. They've been monitoring movement around the property. There are concerns someone is advising Andrew, someone outside the official channels. And frowned. Who? The advisor shook his head. We don't know. Someone had entered the game behind the palace's back. Someone with influence. Someone with information. Someone with an intention the palace couldn't yet identify. Charles closed the folder slowly. So this isn't just financial. No, sir. It isn't. He looked at, and for the first time in the entire meeting, fear flickered in his eyes. The palace wasn't just losing control of the property. They were losing control of the situation. And put both hands on the table. Charles, you have to go to Royal Lodge yourself. Charles swallowed hard. And say what? And held his gaze. Say whatever needs to be said to bring Andrew back from the edge. The king stood, pushing his chair back. Fine. I'll go tomorrow. And stepped forward, her tone dropping lower. No. You need to go today? He hesitated, then nodded. The advisor stepped aside as Charles collected the folder, the one marked Relocation Activation Protocol. He left the room with a quiet, steady determination. And stayed behind. She looked at the advisor. How bad is it really? The advisor hesitated. Then he told the truth. Worse than we thought. And getting worse by the day. And looked toward the door where Charles had just walked out. Then she whispered something under her breath, a sentence the advisor barely heard. He has no idea what he's walking into. And she was right. Because the moment King Charles arrived at Royal Lodge, everything would accelerate. The tension, the panic, the suspicion, the unraveling. And someone inside that house was waiting for him. Someone he didn't expect. Someone who would change the course of the story. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. In most royal dramas, when the family gathers, it's the voices you expect that speak first. The king, the advisors, the press-facing spokespeople. But sometimes, the person who intervenes isn't the one everyone is watching. Sometimes it's the one who waits. Quiet. Observant. Calculating. Princess, and had always been that person. Her presence was understated but impossible to ignore. She didn't raise her voice to make herself heard. She didn't lean on theatrics. She leaned on something far more powerful. Clarity. Focus. Precision. And right now, in this fictional story, Royal Lodge needed her clarity more than ever. The day after the secret meeting between Charles and the advisors, and decided it was time to act. She wouldn't wait for Andrew to stumble further. She wouldn't wait for Charles to arrive with his warnings. She would step in, directly, and arrived at Royal Lodge mid-morning. Her expression unreadable, her posture taut. The staff knew she was coming, but the atmosphere had shifted, whispers had started, the tension thickening as the estate prepared for a presence that rarely visited unannounced. She entered the great hall, the weight of decades of royal history echoing through the room. Andrew, pacing near the window, saw her before anyone else could announce her. His jaw tightened. His shoulders stiffened. The storm brewing inside him flickered in his eyes. And didn't smile. She never needed to. Andrew's first instinct was to shut down, to retreat to familiar routines, to deny the reality of her presence. And didn't wait for permission. She walked directly toward him, confident, unyielding, but not unkind. Andrew, she said simply. He froze mid-step. Her voice was calm but firm. The kind of voice that carried weight, authority, and expectation all at once. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a rebuke. It was the truth delivered with surgical precision. Andrew, she said again, you need to see this clearly. He turned, And for the first time in days, his expression flickered, a mix of apprehension, defiance, and exhaustion.